For 19 years, she stood behind the bar of the Long Branch Saloon and held her own in a town full of gunfighters, outlaws, and desperate men. She was the most famous redhead in America. 60 million viewers tuned in every week to watch her trade quiet looks with Marshal Matt Dillon across a bar top. And everyone in the audience understood what was happening between them, though CBS would never let them say it out loud. But behind the cameras, the real Amanda Blake was living a life far more dramatic than anything the writers of Gunsmoke ever put on paper. 5 marriages, a lion living in her house, 7 generations of cheetahs bred on her Phoenix ranch, oral cancer that took part of her mouth, a husband who married her while hiding a fatal diagnosis, and a death in 1989 that the hospital, her friends, and her family all conspired to lie about, until a doctor broke his silence 3 months later and told the world what really killed Miss Kitty. This is the story no one satisfactorily told, until now. Number 10. The Banker's Daughter from Buffalo. Her real name was Beverly Louise Neill. She was born on February 20th, 1929, in Buffalo, New York, the only child of Jesse Clayton Neill, a banker, and Louise Puckett Neill. The family had one piece of genuine American heritage worth knowing. Beverly was a direct descendant of Catherine Kate Moore Barry, a Revolutionary War heroine who rode through the Carolina backcountry on horseback in 1781 to warn Patriot militias of the British advance before the Battle of Cowpens. That bloodline mattered. It meant that long before Beverly Neill ever set foot in Hollywood, the women in her family had a history of riding hard into danger when everyone else told them to stay home. Her father's banking career dragged the family across the country. She attended schools in the Buffalo suburbs, then Gainesville, Georgia, then Birmingham, Alabama, before the family finally settled in Claremont, California. She enrolled at Pomona College, intending to study art and commercial design. But the theater had already gotten its hooks into her. She had been doing summer stock in New England and radio work back in Buffalo throughout the 1940s, and she was painting scenery between acting gigs just to stay close to the stage. She dropped out of college. She took a job as a telephone operator to pay the bills, and she waited for Hollywood to notice her. Number 9. The next Greer Garson who wasn't. In the late 1940s, someone at MGM got their hands on a screen test of the young redhead from Buffalo and decided she had something special. The studio signed her to a contract and began telling the press she was going to be the next Greer Garson, which was an extraordinary claim because Garson had just come off 5 consecutive Best Actress Oscar nominations. Beverly Neill became Amanda Blake, a name she chose herself because she wanted something snappier. And then MGM proceeded to do what MGM did to hundreds of promising young actresses in the 1950s. They ground her into dust. Her debut came in Stars in My Crown in 1950, playing opposite Joel McCrea. From there, it was an endless parade of bit parts and uncredited roles. Duchess of Idaho, Smuggler's Gold, Criminal Lawyer, where she was billed only as receptionist. Never Trust a Gambler, where she was credited as the Redhead at Police Station. She appeared in more than a dozen films between 1950 and 1955, and in most of them, you could blink and miss her entirely. She did land a small role in George Cukor's A Star is Born in 1954 with Judy Garland and James Mason. She appeared alongside Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly in High Society in 1955. But by the time she was 26 years old, Amanda Blake was stuck in the middle drawer of the Hollywood file cabinet, a working actress with a studio name, a studio hairdo, and absolutely no path to stardom. Then CBS came looking for a woman to run a saloon. Number 8. The audition she refused to leave. When CBS decided to bring its hit adult Western radio series Gunsmoke to television in 1955, casting the role of Miss Kitty Russell was a problem. The producer's first choice was Polly Bond, the reigning Miss California of 1954, who actually turned down the part. For reasons Blake said she never understood, CBS did not want to bring her in to read for the role. Every actress in Hollywood wanted it. As Blake later told writer Ben Costello, everybody in town wanted to play Kitty. I think every actress in Hollywood, even a few drag queens in the right age range, tested for the part. Blake's response was simple. She went to the casting office and she refused to leave. She wore them down, she got her audition, and she walked out with the role that would define the rest of her life. On September 10th, 1955, John Wayne himself appeared on camera to introduce the premiere episode. Wayne had famously declined the lead role of Marshal Matt Dillon and recommended his friend James Arness instead. The William Tell overture swelled. The camera found a dusty Kansas street, and 60 million Americans met the Redhead behind the bar of the Long Branch Saloon. Within 2 seasons, Gunsmoke was the #1 show in all of American television. It would hold that position for 4 consecutive years. And Amanda Blake, the telephone operator from Buffalo, who could not get a credited role at MGM, was suddenly the most watched woman on television. Number 7. The Open Secret. Everyone understood. There was something about Miss Kitty that everybody in the audience understood, but nobody at CBS would ever say out loud. Kitty Russell ran a saloon in 1870s Dodge City. She had rooms upstairs, she employed girls, and her relationship with Marshal Matt Dillon was the worst kept secret on television. The original radio producer, Norman Macdonnell, was blunt about it. He told Time magazine in 1953, "We never say it, but Kitty is a prostitute, plain and simple." Time's reporter observed that the radio Kitty was obviously not selling chocolate bars. When the show moved to television, CBS kept the subtext but buried the text. In the early episodes, Kitty was clearly a dance hall girl. By season 2, they promoted her to half owner of the Long Branch. And from that point forward, she was officially a saloon proprietress with a heart of gold. And nobody was supposed to ask about those 8 rooms upstairs. Amanda Blake knew exactly what she was playing. She once described Miss Kitty publicly as the original whore with a heart of gold, which landed her in mild trouble with the network for saying out loud what they were working so hard to imply without admitting. Television scholars now credit her character as the trope namer for the entire Miss Kitty archetype in Western fiction. And the romance with Matt Dillon was handled with the same agonizing restraint. James Arness himself said if Matt and Kitty had an on-screen love affair, they would have to get married, and then it would be a different show. In all 635 episodes, Matt and Kitty never married. By most fans' reckoning, they never even kissed on screen. Blake once said her character would drift out of Dodge if it were not for Matt Dillon. And 60 million viewers understood exactly what she meant by that. Number 6. 19 years behind the bar. Amanda Blake played Kathleen Kitty Russell from the 1955 premiere through her final episode, The Disciple, which aired on April 1st, 1974, 19 seasons. Over 400 episodes. The longest continuous portrayal of a female character in the history of American television. A record she held for decades. Her starting salary was roughly $1,000 per episode in 1955. By the time she left in 1974, she was earning approximately $12,000 per episode. But in 1961, in a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life, Blake sold her residual rights to Gunsmoke back to the studio for a flat $100,000. It seemed like a fortune at the time, but Gunsmoke became one of the most rerun shows in television history, and those syndication royalties that she signed away would have been worth millions. The Gunsmoke set became her surrogate family. After her second divorce in 1956, she told interviewers that on days she was not called to work, she would drive to the soundstage anyway, because it felt more like home than home did. She worshipped James Arness professionally and adored him personally, though they kept it strictly platonic. She told TV Mirror in 1964, "The big reason the show is still fun to do is Jim. He is just marvelous." Her relationship with Milburn Stone, who played Doc Adams, started badly. Blake admitted publicly, "At first, I hated Milburn. He got third billing on the show, and I wanted it." Stone, oblivious for years, later said, "I had no idea she resented me at the time. All I knew was that she laughed at my jokes, and that was good enough for me." They eventually became close friends. But by the early 1970s, the family was fracturing. Glenn Strange, who played Sam the bartender, died of lung cancer in September 1973. The loss devastated Blake. And her relationship with executive producer John Mantley had deteriorated into open warfare. Number 5. The firing they called a resignation. The official story, the one Amanda Blake told reporters for the rest of her life, was simple. She was tired. It was time to go. As she put it, "God, if I have to put on that damn bustle and those curls one more time, I am gonna snap." 19 years is a hell of a long time for someone to be stuck behind a bar. The real story was uglier. Blake and producer John Mantley had been clashing for years. The trouble escalated in season 17 with a brutally physical location episode called The Lost, in which Blake's character was put through a stagecoach accident, falls down hillsides, crawling through muddy water in a thunderstorm, and a fight with a feral girl, all in heavy period costume under the desert sun. Blake complained loudly. Mantley told people she was always complaining about something. By the end of season 19, Blake had two specific grievances. Mantley had not budgeted new wardrobe for Miss Kitty in several years, and Blake felt the character looked dowdy. And Mantley was preparing a 2-part script for the following season, in which Kitty was to be raped, beaten, abandoned in the desert, and forced into a violent catfight with another woman. Amanda Blake read that script and refused to do it. Mantley dug in. He fired her. Writer Jim Burns was blunt about it years later. What is the official word? She quit? She did not quit. Mantley fired her. Mantley himself later admitted with rare candor that letting her go was the biggest mistake I ever made. They agreed publicly to call it a mutual separation to avoid damaging the show. Gunsmoke itself was canceled by CBS after just one season without Miss Kitty. The Long Branch had lost its heart, and everybody knew it. Number 4, 5 and a Lion in the Living Room. Amanda Blake married 5 times. None of the marriages produced children. Most were brief. She married actor Don Whitman in 1954 and divorced him in 1956. She married Arizona cattleman Jason Day in 1964 and divorced him in 1967. Her longest marriage was to Frank Gilbert, from 1967 to 1982, 15 years, and it was Gilbert who became her partner in the project that would define the second half of her life. On their 4-acre ranch in the Arcadia district of Phoenix, Arizona, Blake and Gilbert built one of the first successful captive breeding programs for cheetahs in American history. They raised 7 generations of cheetahs, many of which were placed in American zoos. Blake made repeated trips to Africa to study cheetahs in the wild. At one point, the Phoenix compound housed 32 exotic animals, including leopards, jaguars, and a full-grown African lion named Chemo, who lived in the house. In February 1974, near the end of her final Gunsmoke season, Blake brought Chemo to the studio. A full-grown lion on a television set. The cast and crew were rattled. Newspaper columnists wrote about it. Blake did not care. The animals were her real life. Gunsmoke was the job that paid for it. In 1971, she co-founded the Arizona Animal Welfare League, which became the oldest and largest no-kill animal shelter in the state. She helped finance the startup of the Performing Animal Welfare Society, known as PAWS, founded by her close friend and animal trainer Pat Darby. She served on the board of the Humane Society of the United States. She traveled to Washington to testify before Congress on animal rights legislation. On the subject of conventional domestic life, Blake was characteristically direct. "I like to come and go as I please, which means I am not anxious to dash back from the studio to fix dinner for a man." Number 3, the cancer that should have been the worst of it. Amanda Blake was a 2 to 3 pack-a-day cigarette smoker for most of her adult life. In 1977, 3 years after leaving Gunsmoke, she was diagnosed with oral cancer. The surgery was severe. It took part of her mouth. She had to relearn how to speak through painful rehabilitation and speech therapy. She survived, and she turned the experience into a crusade. She became a high-profile spokesperson for the American Cancer Society, traveling the country for fundraisers and public appearances. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan personally presented her with the American Cancer Society's Courage Award in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C. The following year, she received the Society's Sword of Hope Award. She quit smoking. She seemed to have won. The cancer did not return. Amanda Blake, the woman who had survived MGM rejection, 19 years of television grind, 5 failed marriages, and oral cancer, appeared to have finally reached the other side. Then she made the worst decision of her life. Number 2, the husband who hid a death sentence. On April 28, 1984, Amanda Blake married Mark Edward Spieth, an Austin, Texas real estate developer and city council member, roughly 10 years her junior. The marriage lasted less than a year. What Blake did not know when she walked down the aisle was that Spieth had been diagnosed with AIDS approximately 2 months before the wedding and had never told her. Spieth was widely understood in Austin's social and political circles to be gay or bisexual. Fellow Austin council member Charles Erdy said publicly that Spieth was perceived as homosexual. A colleague later told reporters, "The general perception was that Amanda was sort of down and out, in some financial difficulty, and that was the reason for the marriage. Mark was fairly well off. He was definitely perceived as being gay." Spieth filed for divorce on April 27, 1985. He died of AIDS-related pneumonia in Austin on May 27, 1985, at age 45, before the divorce was even final. Blake's housekeeper, Jane Price, said publicly that Blake had told her the marriage was never consummated. But by the time the truth about Spieth emerged, the damage was done. Amanda Blake, the woman who had beaten cancer, who had stood behind the Long Branch bar for 19 years without flinching, was now carrying a disease that in 1985 was an automatic death sentence. She told almost no one. Number 1, the lie they told over the body of Miss Kitty. In late 1988, Blake returned from a month-long trip to Africa, looking awful and really sick. Her best friend Pat Darby pushed her to see a doctor. Sacramento internist Dr. Lou Nishimura confirmed what a doctor in Africa had already told her. She had AIDS. In her final year, Blake lived on the Paws Ranch in Galt, California, with Darby and her partner Ed Stewart, surrounded by the rescued animals she had spent her life protecting. She did not want publicity. She did not want to live in a goldfish bowl, Darby later said. She accepted the diagnosis the way she seemed to accept most things. Head up, no complaints. Get on with it. Dr. Nishimura later said. Amanda just seemed to accept it. She was admitted to Mercy General Hospital in Sacramento approximately 3 weeks before the end. On August 16, 1989, Amanda Blake died. She was 60 years old. And then the lying began. The hospital spokesperson told the press that Blake had died of throat cancer. This was the version that ran in newspaper obituaries across the country. It was accepted without question because Blake had a known cancer history. Her friends had requested the cover story. In 1989, an AIDS diagnosis still carried a devastating stigma, and the people who loved Amanda Blake wanted to protect her memory from becoming a sideshow. But 3 months later, Sacramento television anchorwoman Christine Kraft called Dr. Nishimura, and the doctor told the truth. The death certificate he had signed listed the cause as cardiopulmonary arrest due to liver failure and CMV hepatitis, with AIDS as a contributing cause. CMV hepatitis is a classic AIDS-defining illness. Blake had not been a needle drug user. She had not received a blood transfusion. The most widely accepted explanation was that she had contracted HIV from Mark Spath. The New York Times ran the story on November 8, 1989. Amanda Blake died of AIDS, doctor says. People magazine followed 12 days later. And the reason the truth came out at all was heartbreaking in its own right. Blake had left her entire estate, valued at approximately $400,000, to Paws, her beloved animal sanctuary. Her relatives contested the will. To defend the bequest, Darby and Nishimura had to make the real circumstances of her death a matter of public record. Amanda Blake became one of the first major American actresses publicly identified as having died of AIDS. Because she was a heterosexual woman with no risk factors except a single short marriage to a man who had hidden his diagnosis, her case quietly became one of the earliest high-profile examples of heterosexual HIV transmission in the United States. Before her death, she had helped stitch panels for the AIDS memorial quilt displayed on the National Mall. Quiet work she never publicized. Her body was cremated. A cenotaph was placed at Elmwood Cemetery in Birmingham, Alabama, bearing her real name, Beverly Louise Neill. So let us run through that one more time. A banker's only daughter from Buffalo. A telephone operator who could not get a credited role at MGM. A redhead who refused to leave a casting office until they gave her an audition. The most watched woman on American television for nearly 2 decades. A woman who sold her residuals for $100,000 and watched millions walk out the door. 5 husbands, 32 exotic animals, 7 generations of cheetahs, and a full-grown lion in the living room. A cancer survivor who took the Courage Award from a president. A woman whose 5th husband married her while hiding a fatal secret. And a death that the hospital, her friends, and her family all lied about until a doctor looked at a death certificate and decided the truth mattered more than the comfort of a cover story. Her money built the first elephant habitat at Paws. 35 years after her death, her bequest is still saving animals she never got to meet. In 1968, she was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, only the 3rd performer ever honored, 6 years before John Wayne and more than a decade before her own co-star James Arness. If this story moved you, hit subscribe now, because the next video is going to hit even harder. Amanda Blake once said she would drift out of Dodge if it were not for the things that anchored her. The animals anchored her. The Long Branch anchored her. And in the end, when everything else was taken away, the truth is what anchored her legacy. Her name was Beverly Louise Neill, but 60 million Americans knew her as Miss Kitty. And now you know what it cost her.